Imagine, if you will, it's the early 1990s, and you've just been taken as an outside linebacker out of Colorado in the second round by the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is at the height of the blitzburgh era, where you got Bill Cowher sending them from every different direction, and this guy's dropping in coverage, and that guy's coming, and you don't know what is what as an offense. And you know this as a defensive player coming to that exciting defense that also seems to have an endless supply of outside linebackers that they're able to coach up so that when they get on the football field, they are a dynamic presence within that defense, in many ways running that defense with their kind of production. And you go to that team initially and you have to sort of wait your turn because it is a stacked unit out there on the edge. So you play middle linebacker early on in your career, waiting for that opportunity. And then you're finally put out on the edge there with the Steeler team. And boy, do you excel. You are a star on the rise, getting better every single season. To the tune of, by the fourth year, you put up 13 sacks and you're all over the place on the tape. In fact, you're fourth in Defensive Player of the Year voting. The sky seems the limit. Your pathway appears set for potentially a Hall of Fame road. But now you come to free agency. And now you got the Pittsburgh Steelers at that time, not all that willing to spend all that much money on their own free agents. Kind of famous at that time for letting them go out the door. It just wasn't their way, is what they would say. And that you have now the team that offers you the most money in free agency, the team that's willing to give you a record-breaking contract, is one that's going to send you to a different defense that's going to move you out of that role that allowed you to shine so brightly, that allowed you to put up those statistics in the sack department, pressure department, which would allow people to really appreciate your greatness. And instead, now you're going to go to a new different defense and play more of a Swiss Army knife-like role. Would you sign? Would you go? Would you go back to Pittsburgh for 60%, 50% of the money in order to shine your star brighter? Well, indeed, this was the choice that was facing Chad Brown in free agency back in the day when he came to our Seattle Seahawks. He came on Paul Allen's private jet to Seattle, and it was a little uncertain at that time if they could keep him here. This was a team, after all, that didn't have a winning tradition, and they didn't tend to like to spend very much money. But this was Paul Allen at that time. This was going to be a keynote signing that indicated to the fan base that, yes, indeed, not only do I own this team, but I'm going to be committed to winning. And I'm going to spend money where I have to help this team out wherever I may. And so he brought Chad in, offered him the record-breaking deal. Chad took the money. Nobody can fault him for that. But what it did then was put Chad in that Swiss Army knife role where there were times in a 4-3 defense he was playing the Sam linebacker role. And there's other times he was playing the Will linebacker role. And there's even a few snaps in there you might have him playing the middle linebacker role. And yes, there were opportunities within that where he would indeed still rush the passer. But it depressed his stats. And as we can see with the NFL, as it pertains to the Hall of Fame, it's very hard for off-ball linebackers that are not middle linebackers to get into the Hall of Fame unless they've got some real shining stats that they can present. In recent years, Derek Brooks of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is the only guy to get in there, and largely in part because he's part of a historically great defense, but also because of all the interceptions he was able to rack up over the course of his career. Chad came here and he was great in the ground game. You could stop the run. He could run sideline to sideline. He could cover anybody. He could run in that respect for days. And yes, he was also a phenomenal pass rusher. For me, there is one question that looms over Chad Brown's career. If he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory with the Pittsburgh Steelers and that he was just rounding into shape with that 13 sack season and being into the Defensive Player of the Year honor contention, and he was going to put more of those years back to back, 12 sacks, 13 sacks, 14 sacks, 13 sacks. And he got up over 100 sacks for his career rather than the 79 that he did get to, even only in a partial rush role. Would he be in the Hall of Fame? Would he be wearing a yellow jacket today? I think the answer is yes. And then the other question that then comes on the top of this is that if he came from Pittsburgh on that trajectory and came into Seattle's defense and played into a new role that would see him moved all over the football field, did he give the Seahawks equivalent production to what the Steelers got, albeit playing in that different role that didn't allow him to shine flying off the edge as he was for the Steelers? And for me, the answer is hell yes. But don't take my word for it. Let's see what Chad Brown had to say when I presented that very same question to him last year during an interview. One question I want to ask you that's a little bit just about what I wonder in your own head and looking at your playing career a little bit. You go to Pittsburgh, they kick you inside. And to me, you're an outside 3-4 linebacker is really what, to me, you should have been playing day one of your whole career all the way. And please correct me if I'm wrong on this, throughout. That was where you would have been at your best. Because when you were finally slid into that point after, I know Kevin Green came in a signing, then there was an injury. You finally got to play at the end of your time there at Pittsburgh on that outside. You almost put up a defensive player of the year type year. And then you come to Seattle and I mean, I watched this tape. I've watched a lot of the tape prepping for this interview. They still had you as now kind of the off-ball linebacker a lot of the time, where you're playing some Will, a little bit of Sam. Sometimes you are rushing the passer. But I sit back and wonder, man, what would it have been like if Chad was going 24/7, coming off that edge, screaming off that edge all the time without some of the coverage responsibilities there, and that the team just, well, we need you to play here.
Well, okay, so to go to the Pittsburgh part of things, I flew out to Pittsburgh before the draft, and I sat down with Marvin Lewis, longtime Cincinnati Bengals coach, who was my position coach in Pittsburgh before the draft, and we watched tape for me as an outside linebacker. He was viewing me as an outside linebacker. Now, let's go even before that. At the University of Colorado, I was signed as an outside linebacker, but Alfred Williams, who eventually becomes a Cincinnati Bengal and Denver Bronco, Kanavis McGee, those guys have just become coming off their All-American freshman years at outside linebacker. So in order to get me on the field as quickly as possible, they asked me to move to inside linebacker. And so I played there my first 2 years in Colorado. Well, those guys were on the outside being All-Americans as they were, a first-round pick and a second-round pick. Those guys leave, then I slide to outside linebacker. Okay, now I'm having this conversation before the draft with Marvin Lewis, and we're talking about outside linebacker. The day before the draft, Bill Cowher calls me and says, Chad, can you play inside linebacker? And my reply is, hey, man, I can punt if you want me to. I'll do whatever I need to do. Well, we just signed Kevin Green. We're going to pair him on the other side from Greg Lloyd, and we'll slide you to inside linebacker. Cool. Sounds great. Whatever. Now, I think there's a certain part of my personality that lends itself to this, hey, whatever's clever, just get me on the field. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to help the team win. But to your point, yes, would I have been better served from a complete career arc, beginning to end, to have just played outside linebacker? Probably so. I certainly would have ended my career with over 100 sacks.
That was my question.
And that's kind of the borderline for Hall of Fame kind of thing. Do I get 120? Am I a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame? Am I wearing a gold jacket? Probably. Now go to Seattle. In the first 2 years there, I'm with, first is Greg McMackin, defensive coordinator. Then my second year becomes Jim Johnson. He was not defensive coordinator in name, but he was defensive coordinator as far as calling plays. So I was playing multiple spots. My first year, I was Will. Winston Moss was playing Sam on the line of scrimmage. Then when Jim Johnson came around, I was a little bit more of a blitz guy, kind of an inside backer, not really an outside backer. The next year, Fritz Shermer and Mike Holmgren come in. They like big defensive ends because they're coming away from the Reggie White experience in Green Bay. I played dime linebacker most of that season. I rarely put my hand in the dirt. So I had a number of years, not just in Pittsburgh, but in Seattle as well, where I was not rushing the quarterback. And I don't think I was necessarily used to my strongest suit. But, I've always valued coaches who take a look around their team. This is what I've got. These are the guys I have. How do I best put the best team out there? So I've always been willing to sacrifice self for team. When I've coached little kids, when I've talked to other professionals, hey, at some point you're going to have to sacrifice self for the team. And that's just an expectation in football. Would I love to have been Kevin Green, a 3-4 mercenary for hire? Kevin played for so many teams. He played left outside linebacker, not right, always left. He only did one thing, but he did it at an amazingly high level. Finished with 160 sacks in 15 seasons. So there's something to be said for that. But I also think there's something to be said for my mindset as well. So I like to think I helped my teams as best needed and where I best could fit in. At the same time, I would have been better served individually as a pure outside linebacker, getting after the quarterback down after down after down.
Will Chad Brown ever get into the Hall of Fame? I don't know. Should he? Does he deserve to? Was he one hell of a player for our Seahawks team at a time where it was one of the darkest times and we were trying to reestablish that culture and find our ways to a winning team? Yeah. Was he one of the originators to help establish that culture, as at the end of his run you were getting into the playoffs perennially under Mike Holmgren? Oh, yeah. So hopefully someday Chad is able to get in and wear that jacket. Maybe it is going to have to be the Veterans Committee that gets him in eventually, but he deserves it. And so if you ever do see that pop up on your Twitter or anything else as far as to retweet this or like this as far as for Chad for Hall of Fame, do it. The man deserves it. He was blood and guts for this team when not a lot of people were watching, but it doesn't mean he wasn't getting it done. My name is Brandon Kane. This is the Hawks Nest. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. But beyond all that, don't you ever forget, go Hawks.